What happens if the draft comes back? It's a question that's on a lot of people's mind right now. And there are some things you should be aware of for if you get drafted, just so you know what your options may be or what might disqualify you from it in case that's the kind of information you're looking for. And I am not here to promote you make any particular decision regarding your draft eligibility status or what you would do in regards to being drafted, but I'm trying to present you with the information so that you have it and can work with that information to strategically plan for that possibility. And if you're worried about a draft happening because of World War III, then hit the subscribe button below because these are the types of conversations I try to have here on the channel in order to give you more information. So, first and foremost, you have to register if you're a man between the ages of 18 and 25. That doesn't matter if you're a citizen or an immigrant. If you are a male and you're between the ages of 18 and 25, you have to register for the Selective Service. That's the first step. What happens if you don't even register? Well, if you don't register, that can actually be a felony that's punishable up to 5 years in prison or with a $250,000 fine. So that's a pretty substantial crime, especially to gain a felonious status all of a sudden and lose rights to other things such as possibly the Second Amendment, right? So keep in mind that the first step is to register, and if you don't even do that, you're already committing a felony in many ways. Now, here's what else to keep in mind. Okay, if they decide to bring the draft back, which there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that they might have to. We are very behind in our recruiting numbers, and the military is going to need a lot more people if this global conflict opens up all over the place, which it looks like it's currently doing. So, things you need to know. Postponements, deferments, and exemptions. These are all things that could possibly either delay your ability to be drafted or even stop you from being drafted. So this kind of is proactive in the sense of trying to ensure that you're not necessarily a candidate, right? So how does that work? Well, you would file a claim only after you receive an order to report, basically being drafted. And it has to be filed before the day that you are required to report. And then after you file the claim, which is to change the status of your ability to be drafted into one that no longer allows you to be, well, that claim will then just get submitted and you will be contacted with further information regarding what steps to take next. So that's kind of how the timeline would work. You would have to be drafted and then file a claim saying why you can't be drafted either right now or at all, and then wait for them to come back to you with information about what to do next. What are postponements, deferments, and exemptions? Well, postponements are where you can't be drafted right now due to a few select qualifiers. What would those postponements be? Well, it can be for high school students, and that would mean that if you're a high school student, you can't be drafted until after you graduate or you become 20 years old, whichever one happens first, which means you're either a very super senior and probably should get it together anyway, or you're just still in high school when they try to draft you because, you're 18 and you're a senior or whatever it might be, and, you got to finish your education. So if you're in high school still and you get drafted, you still have some time. So that gives you something to consider, okay? And just keep in mind, the Selective Service doesn't really care about things like what gender you consider yourself to be. They specifically state that if you were born a biological male, then you can be drafted. And if you were born a biological female, then you cannot be drafted. That's all there is to it, according to their rules and regulations as of right now. So just be aware, this does not affect females at all, but it would affect females who have men in their family that might be drafted. So keep that in mind. Now, what's another postponement that would be able for you to delay your draft status? Well, college students can actually receive a postponement until the end of their current semester, which isn't very long, obviously, or until the end of the academic year if it's your senior year. So if you're in college, you can at least delay being drafted until the end of the semester or the end of the year if you're a senior. So that gives you something to consider. You also get an automatic delay just for refiling for classification changes, right? So if you file that claim, you're going to be delayed anyway, but there's not really like a timeline on that. It just means that there's going to be time in between them processing that claim and sending you that additional information and taking those additional steps before you actually get inducted into service. And then another postponement would be an emergency that's beyond his control or your control, depending on how you want to look at this whole thing, such as serious illness or death in your immediate family. So, like I said, I'm not advising anyone on what to do here or anything like that. But if you wanted to postpone your draft status, you would either need to be in high school and under the age of 20. You'd either need to be in college and you have until the end of the semester or the end of the academic year if you're a senior. You would file a claim regardless because that would delay everything to a certain degree anyway. Or an emergency beyond your control has to happen, like serious illness or a death in your immediate family. Now, these are just things to keep in mind. I'm just trying to give you the information that's out there so you can prepare yourself mentally for whatever decisions you decide you need to make. Now, before we go further, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And of course, they allow you to get a lot of the gear and equipment required for dealing with the fact that we're in a situation requiring the draft to come back. So big thanks to Midway USA for always supporting what I do here, okay? Here's the thing. And this is just going to give you a little bit of my personal take before we move on to deferments, which is something that would defer your ability to be drafted for a longer period of time than a postponement, okay? If the draft is necessary because we need it to survive a global conflict as a country and a nation, and the United States of America won't exist otherwise, then you really have to consider where your service may be necessary, okay? Because if this country ceases to exist, so does your way of life, and so does your quality of life, and so does the life of those around you. So you have to keep that in mind. It's not so black and white as to say, I refuse to go fight wars for the bankers or whatever else it might be, because sometimes war comes to you regardless of how you feel about it. So I really just want to make sure you all take a very strong inner look at yourself and your thought process when it comes to dealing with the draft and what your options may be, because sometimes the most obvious answer might be the right answer. We're in very difficult and challenging times, so I want to make sure you make all the considerations before any decisions are made, okay? Now, deferments. What are deferments, all right? Well, you can be deferred from being drafted if it creates hardship for men whose induction would actually hurt those that depend on them directly, aka people that are financially dependent on the man of the family. So if you're the breadwinner in your family and your wife and children will suffer because you are suddenly gone, right? Or if you're a caretaker in your family and you have to provide, medical assistance to, maybe an elderly family member or something like that, those are all considerations that could lead you towards deferment, okay? So if you're very strongly opinionated about not being drafted, maybe make yourself irreplaceable in your immediate family unit in the sense of being very important to being where you are right this second, all right? Just keep that in mind. I'm just trying to give you ideas and options. I'm not telling you what you should or should not do. Another deferment is for ministerial students until they complete their studies. So if you're really concerned about it, and look, the reason I'm bringing this all up and the reason I'm telling you all about it is because a lot of you are concerned about it. I'm getting a lot of messages and a lot of comments and a lot of emails about what happens if I get drafted. These are considerations to make. If you really don't want to be drafted and you want to be deferred, but you don't want to do anything illegal, maybe joining the ministry might help you out in that, especially if you have the inclination to be of that faith and to move yourself forward in the cloth, let's just say. So if you're a ministerial student, you're not going to be able to be drafted right that second. Just a consideration. Okay, now those are deferments. The hardship one makes sense. If you leave your family and they're suddenly completely screwed because you're not there anymore to take care of them, that's not going to work out for anybody, right? So it makes a lot of sense. Ministerial is definitely, or being a ministerial student is definitely, let's just say, a particular scenario that seems to have a level of, I don't like to use the word privilege, but it sounds privileged anyway for that specific task to be deferred. But I'm just letting you know that that is out there. Exemptions. What would just exempt you from being drafted completely? Right? Okay, well, one would be ministers. If you're a minister, you're exempted. So if you're a ministerial student, you are deferred, and then once you become a minister, you are exempted. maybe the ministry's not so bad if you really don't want to go to war. Just throwing it out there. Now, also, certain elected officials, as long as they hold office, are exempt from being drafted. Certain elected officials, right? So the ones that they like, not the ones they don't like. But maybe run for office. Ever thought of politics? That might keep you from being drafted if you become one of those certain elected officials. So, weigh out your options in the sense of what you would prefer, and maybe that's an option for you. And these are all ways that you would exempt yourself without doing anything illegal. So, what's next? Well, veterans are actually exempt from the draft in peacetime. So I don't know how that would apply if they had to reinstate the draft because of global conflict. I'm pretty sure a lot of them would be called back no matter what. So, but just keep in mind that veterans are exempt from the draft in a peacetime environment. So if you are serving right now or have already served, and then we find ourselves in a peacetime scenario where the draft is reinstated, then that would create an exemption status for you. Another way you could be exempt, this is something else you could consider, is that sometimes certain circumstances, immigrants or dual nationals are exempt. Because if you're a dual national, you have citizenship in, let's say, Canada and the United States, whose army do you get drafted to, right? So there's certain scenarios where you're not going to be drafted because whose country are you actually part of in that scenario, right? So dual citizenship might be a consideration for you if you're thinking about living somewhere else part of the year, or maybe want to be part of another scenario besides the United States of America. Dual citizens, based on certain scenarios, which is something I would highly recommend you research before making any decisions regarding any of that, may exempt you from being able to be drafted. So for those of you who are very concerned about this, have you ever thought about, I don't know, like Mexico or something? I don't know. That's up to you. So these are all the ways that you would either receive a postponement, a deferment, or an exemption. Now, what if you get drafted anyway, right? Even if you filed your claim and everything happens and goes through, and then, sorry, but you're still going in, right? Well, maybe you finished high school and now it's just time. Your deferment's up. Or your postponement is up, sorry. These words, they're just words. Even if you are drafted, there are things that could disqualify you from service, okay? Now, these are not positive things in general, but I'm just letting you know that these things might disqualify you from service, which means if this is a big concern for you, just keep these in mind, I guess. Anyway, first is obesity. If you're obese, that's a health condition, and you won't be able to get through certain trials of boot camp and everything else related to what obesity would prevent you from being able to do. So it's possible they may find a job for you in the military, but it's highly unlikely you'll find yourself in a combat scenario. So obesity might limit your ability to be drafted or where you might end up post-draft. So if you're very concerned about this and you are not exactly sure how else to approach it, maybe McDonald's could be your best friend for the next 6 to 8 months, all right? Why did I say 6 to 8 months? Disregard that. I have no idea why I would be on that timeline. Anyway, also a criminal record might disqualify you from the draft. Certain felonies are going to make it so they don't want you to be in the service. Certain criminal activity in your past might not allow you to be inducted. So, also health problems. Health problems can definitely get you disqualified. Some of those are as simple as asthma, ADHD can get you disqualified, and of course, mental health issues can get you disqualified. So if you have a history of mental health issues, or you have a history of other health-related issues like asthma or things that affect your body without your ability to fix it or anything else like that, that might disqualify you. So you may be able to, avoid being drafted based on whatever your health profile looks like. Okay, another one that is really bad and that you should obviously not even have to concern yourself with, but just so you're aware, because it is part of the list of disqualifiers that's out there, is drug use. For all those bad drug users out there, they're not going to let you in if you're, addicted to drugs or if you have problems with drug abuse and things of that nature. So don't, do those things because they're bad and they won't allow you to get drafted. That's bad. Okay, so I hope this gave you some things to think about. Now, what happens if you do evade the draft? What if you get drafted and you try to run, right? Or you try to avoid actually being taken into boot camp or training, right? What happens if you evade? Because a lot of people evaded in Vietnam, right? Okay, well, here's what can happen. And also, by the way, this could happen to someone who helps you evade, aka your parents, your girlfriend, whoever. Anyone that helps you avoid getting drafted can also be penalized the same way as you. So keep that in mind. 50 US Code 3811. Section A states that you can receive up to 5 years in prison or up to $10,000 in fines for draft evasion. And you might even be court-martialed if you were inducted for training and service and decided to evade your duty thereafter. And not to forget that in a martial law scenario that is highly likely in a global conflict that forces the draft to be reinstated, the military then controls the courts and, in many ways, the law of the land, and those punishments, penalties, and the retribution of those who evaded the draft might be more severe than what we even are aware of right now. So, evasion is costly and very risky, and I don't condone anyone breaking the law, and you shouldn't do anything illegal. But if you're concerned about all the things that you're concerned about regarding being drafted, now you understand what would postpone that, defer that, exempt you from that, and possibly disqualify you from service even after you do get drafted. Why do I share information like this? Because it gives you the tools required to make the best decision for you. Like I said, I highly want you to self-reflect and really consider what might be at stake if you refuse to serve during a time where that service may be required for us to maintain our status as a sovereign country. Because that's possible. And it's something that we should all consider. Now, if you're worried about how the world's going to look after a global conflict that requires the draft, then make sure you check out Genesis Gold Group because they support the channel and they can help you transform some of your wealth and assets into precious metal-backed wealth and assets, which means they might be more stable throughout some tumultuous times. And historically, they have been. And one thing I like about Genesis Gold Group is that they're not tied to the CCP in any way, shape, or form, whereas many other precious metals companies certainly are. So check them out at magicpreppergold.com because it helps the channel and it will help you if that's something you decide is best for your situation. I'm not a financial advisor, but talk to them if that's something you're interested in, and they can actually guide you towards whatever plan might work best for your particular scenario. And if you are interested in exclusive content, preparedness incentives, and things of that nature, check out the Subscribe Star. It's $5 a month. I'll have a link down below in the comments as well as in the description. And that way, if you want to be part of a members-only kind of club, and I do a members-only live stream once a week as well as preparedness incentives, that allows you to do that. So Subscribe Star is a great option for that. But listen, I'll talk more about this on Subscribe Star in a more casual format and probably in the live streams as well. But this is a difficult decision for anybody to make, right? And I already know where I stand because I'm way past the threshold of being drafted based on age as of right now. But that could change in an instant if things get very dire, as we saw in Russia where they changed their age quite quickly during that conflict. So I'm prepared for that to be a possibility at the very least, which means I already know what decisions I would make regarding that. But you have to make those decisions personally. This is a very personal choice and a very difficult risk versus reward equation to solve because it's not the same risk or reward for everyone. And there are things that could change the necessity of whether or not that service is required from you as well as the rest of us. So, not a light subject per se, but one worth exploring and at least one worth informing you about. Anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.